In 2013, Intel launched an impressive mini PC with an i3 Ice Canyon. I've actually got one right here. And while Intel had little competition for most of that time, much has changed 10 years on in the mini PC space, and it's become a viable platform with plenty of manufacturers jumping on board the mini bandwagon. So, is the i3 NUC 12 Pro still relevant today? One of the biggest changes over last year is the core count, thanks to Intel's big little CPU design. The i3 NUC was a dual core for 9 years. Yes, it's only changed with the NUC 12 Pro, which shot up to 10 cores and 12 threads for the i3. 2 performance, 8 efficient, though some would say that sounds like a dual core anyway. I bought this i3 NUC 12 Pro for 599 Aussie dollars, which is only $100 less than the i5 model. And that's bare bones, so you'll need to add DDR4 memory, storage, and an OS. Oh, and a Clover power cord. I've gone through so many PCs lately that I forgot about this ridiculousness, and this time, the store I bought it from didn't include one for free. So, jumping in the car and cursing all the way, I made a 30-minute round trip to the closest computer store to pick one up. You know, so I could actually use the device I paid over $5,000 for. It's complete bullshit, and another $10 on top of the price of the unit. In the box, you will find a 90-watt power supply with no power cord, monitor mount, screws, and the usual paper. Now I need to come clean and point out a blunder I made, like a chump, in my previous NUC 12 Pro reviews. When I looked at it really closely, I noticed some visible seams on the corners, which tipped me off to it. While the inside frame is metal, the outer shell has been exchanged for plastic, and that sucks. This is a downgrade from previous generations. Obviously another cost-cutting measure, like the power cord, and with no price drop. Gotta increase those profit margins, right? Even the budget NUC 11 Essential has a metal case. On the front are a pair of USB 3 10GB ports and a dual-purpose audio jack. On the back are 2 Thunderbolt 4, aka USB 4 ports. There's also a USB 3 10GB, dual HDMI 2.1, USB 2, 2.5GB LAN, and it's powered by a barrel jack. Yep, even though this one falls under the 100-watt USB-C power delivery limit. Anyway, Intel's one of the few mini PC designers that understands that opening the unit should be easy. All you have to do is remove the 4 exposed screws, lift the lid, and you're done. Take note, mini PC manufacturers, if it's any more difficult than this, you're doing it wrong. The NUC 12 Pro has thermal pads for the M.2 drives, which connects to the metal frame for cooling. And this tall model also allows you to add a 2.5-inch storage drive, together with a 2242 SATA M.2 and regular size Gen 4 NVMe SSD slot. You can have 3 storage drives in this tiny box. The Wi-Fi 6E M.2 card is replaceable, and DDR4 SODIMM tops out at 3200 MHz. The CMOS battery is on the other side, and the cooling is your usual mix of copper and high-pitched fan. If you don't want to use Windows, you don't have to. Ubuntu works straight off the USB without issue. In the BIOS, you can mess around with the power limits if you want to push or reduce performance, and you can also set a manual fan curve. That's pretty much it for the interesting stuff. Okay, I like to compare against the previous generation to show how much performance has increased. I have to note though, that unit was $100 cheaper and had a metal case, so keep that in mind. I'll also compare it against the i5 NUC 12 Pro, which is an extra $100 Aussie. We have to start with Cinebench R20 scores, as I don't have the R23 data for the last gen i3. In single core, the generational increase is 18%, which is still 7% behind the i5. In multi-core, there's a huge increase of 75%. However, you'll notice it's still slower than a 4-core from the previous generation. It's also behind the i5 NUC 12 Pro by a chunky 43%. And now for the Cinebench R23 scores, which run the same benchmark for 10 minutes. Again, 7% behind the i5 in single core, and again, 43% behind the i5 in multi-core. That's some consistent performance for both minis. The generational improvement for video encoding is 44%, and it's behind the i5 by 42%. So the i5 gets you an extra 7% single core performance and around 43% in multi-core, depending on the workload. Let's check out a couple of graphics benchmarks. In 3D Mark DX11, there's a 13% improvement against last gen, which is 20% behind the i5 NUC 12 Pro. In DX12, the generational improvement is 15%, and that's behind the i5 by a large 37%. Let's check out how it does in actual games. The i5 clearly has the better frame rate, but the margin tightens depending on the area in the game. In Hades, the i3 is behind 20%. In Valorant, the i5 and i7 are mostly memory bandwidth limited, which caps the frame rate to that 150 FPS mark. But that's not the case with the i3. Its frame rate is definitely below the other two. In God of War, the CPU and GPU get hit hard and tanks the frame rate. It performs poorly against the other two NUCs. So the game comparisons show that 3D Mark wasn't far off at all. Next, I wanted to see how it holds up as an emulation box. For Semu, I was curious if the UHD graphics would hold up with something like Splatoon, and it manages a locked 60 FPS. But the difficult to emulate Breath of the Wild stays under 30 FPS. With PS3 emulation, I hoped things had improved with the Vulkan driver, but nope, it still crashes. So I switched to OpenGL. For some reason, there's a bug with Afterburner that still shows it as Vulkan. Anyway, Wipeout still doesn't run well, as this is a 60 FPS game. Skate 3 also runs poorly, and MotorStorm is a graphical mess and runs slow. You'd have to drop the resolution to 720p to get some PS3 games to run at full speed. And all of these benchmarks seemed very familiar, so I checked out NUC 11 i5 benchmarks, and the results are the i3 is faster at single core, slower at multi-core, and at graphics. All for the same price as the i5 NUC 11 Panther Canyon unit from 2021. Awesome. Idle power draw is the same as most of the recent units. Max power draw is a lot lower than the i5 and i7, but it's up quite a bit over the previous generation i3. CPU temp is down in the lower end of the chart, but it's nothing impressive. What was impressive was the NVMe drive temperature. Intel's cooling solution did a good job of keeping temps in check. It is the quietest of the NUC 12 Pros, but compared to the competition, it's not very impressive under load, especially considering the low wattage. Okay, let's go over the good and the bad. The i3 NUC 12 Pro allows for 3 storage drives in a tiny box. It's got great M.2 cooling. In Australia, it comes with a 3-year warranty. That's the best warranty of any mini PC around. The NUC 12 Pro units come with dual Thunderbolt 4 ports. And if you need 2 of them, the NUCs are the only mini PCs this small to have more than one. However, the i3 is expensive. It doesn't come with a power cord. The shell of the case has been switched to plastic, there's no DDR5 and no USB power delivery. What's going on? Intel NUCs were meant to be on the bleeding edge of tech. If I was interested in the NUC 12 Pro units for myself, which I'm not, but if I was, I would find a review that has actual comparisons and isn't trying to sell you every piece of crap that comes their way. And looking at the benchmarks, I'd say, yeah, nah, that's a lot of performance lost for just a 100 Aussie dollar saving over the i5. Both the i5 and i7 provide more bang for buck, which is an odd thing to say for an i7. And unless I was dead set on an Intel NUC, I would look elsewhere, such as my top 5 minis of 2022 video. This overpriced unit is irrelevant in today's market, performing mostly worse than the previous Gen i5, which was priced exactly the same. But there's still one last hope if you're looking for a quality entry-level unit. You might want to wait for the Intel NUC 12 Essential. Of course, that's if Intel decides to actually release it. I'd expect to see it in Q1 of 2023. And if that one is sneakily switched to a plastic case and doesn't come with a power cord, I will completely lose my shit and shake my head in dismay at what has happened to the NUC line over the years. Cheers!